Egypt's security forces are still clashing with Muslim Brotherhood supporters as we speak. And aside the military coup and the detention of Muhammed Morsi, the top figures of the Brotherhood have also been taken into custody, and they will probably be charged with inciting violence during the mass demonstrations in Cairo. But aside all these recent developments, several pro-Brotherhood institutions have also been shut down. The Islamist-dominated Shura Council has also been dissolved. So there is a systematic crackdown on the organization, and the question remains, what is next? Not just for the Brotherhood and the opposition forces, but what is next for Egypt in general? This is a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. Now, back in 2011, I argued that the revolution in Egypt was in fact a military coup and that the country's armed forces used the massive unrest to get rid of a rival. I also noted that more coups would eventually follow, and a few days ago we witnessed how it all unraveled and how easy it was for the military to suspend the government. I think that the military has set a dangerous example, because what it means is that future governments can be removed from office by the military when faced with massive unrest. And this all creates mistrust between the civilian government and the armed forces of the country. As for the opposition, it is basically a large protest movement, united only in their goal of forcing Morsi to step down, and that has been accomplished, but the opposition has no coherent core. The protesters are too diverse, ranging from liberals to Islamists and to unemployed people and even to ethnic and religious minorities. So the opposition will have a hard time finding common ground and establishing a political foundation that can rival the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, I think because of the military coup, Egypt's political system will be even more polarized than before. The only realistic solution for a stable political environment would be a coalition government that represents every segment of Egyptian society. This is of course easier said than done. The mistrust among the various groups doesn't help this idea. So to be blunt, right now there are no alternatives to the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party. The thing is that the Muslim Brotherhood waited for so long to enter the public politics of Egypt. And now that they had a taste of power, it is unlikely that they will back down so easily. There will of course be a number of reforms in the organization. Certain figures will be replaced by a new generation of politicians. But in the end, the recent coup is only a minor misstep in the context of the history of the Muslim Brotherhood. I expect the Brotherhood to engage in civil resistance, and this is what they do best. But I also want to point out one more important note, and that is the isolation of Islamic groups from the mainstream political system. By continuously isolating certain segments or parties, and in this case an Islamic-based party, well, all it really does is make the organization even more determined, more conservative, and possibly even transforming them into an armed resistance. This has happened many times throughout the Middle East, and there already are a number of splinter groups of the Muslim Brotherhood who engage in violence and armed conflict. The most famous Muslim Brotherhood splinter organization is Hamas. My point is that by continuously isolating the Brotherhood, it may actually create a new armed organization. So this is the kind of blowback we need to consider. Now, former President Morsi had several major shortcomings. His party was unable to establish an independent command of law enforcement agencies, so the loyalty of most of the police, intelligence and military forces lied with the military generals and not with the president of the country. And the same applies to the judiciary system of Egypt. Most judges were appointed by former President Mubarak, and so their loyalties lay with the military as well. Now, Morsi focused on consolidating power for his party, and this is really what triggered the current unrest. One way of increasing his power was by lowering the mandatory retirement age for judges. He basically was trying to force out the military loyalist judges and replacing them with pro-Brotherhood figures. And this really upset the ruling class of the country because they viewed this as the prime example of Morsi's attempt to expand his political influence. But then again, Morsi really didn't have much power to begin with. Most of the government institutions remained loyal to the military, so in reality, the military was still in charge. There are, of course, many more flaws and mistakes that the Freedom and Justice Party made, including discrimination against religious minorities, their inability to stabilize the deteriorating economic conditions of the country. Now, on this last note, I want to be fair because the 1 year that Morsi was in power was clearly not enough to tackle the major financial issues that Egypt faces. And the massive unrest and demonstrations in the country during the tourist season really doesn't help the economy. If anything, the economy is now much worse off. Regional investors like Libya, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are now considering withdrawing their investments. One example is Qatar, who pledged to invest about 10 billion in US dollars in Egypt to support the Muslim Brotherhood's projects. If countries like Qatar and Libya withdraw their loans and cancel their investments, then Egypt will have a hard time securing any further IMF loans. And considering the fact that Egypt is short on capital, they urgently need those loans and investments. The fundamental problem here lies with the geopolitics of the country. On the surface, Egypt looks like a vast country, but if you take a closer look, you will notice that the population density is centered around the Nile Delta and river. Some 98% of Egyptians live on 3% of the territory, and it makes sense because most of Egypt is a desert wasteland and people need water to survive and develop. So the real Egypt is roughly the size of Belgium, but with a population of 84 million, stretched over 1,000 kilometers. This kind of long, thin stretch obviously raises the costs of transportation, exports, and manufacturing, so it makes Egypt not really attractive in terms of investment. And the situation will only get worse as the years go by, because the Nile River system can only sustain a limited amount of people, and Egypt has surpassed that number long ago. Its population increased from 59 million in 1996 to 84 million in 2013. That is a significant increase in the last 2 decades, and it explains why the number of unemployment and food and fuel imports are rising. According to UN projections, the population of Egypt will reach 100 million by the year 2030. So at this course, the country is heading towards an economic collapse. If you consider all these factors, then it really doesn't matter who will govern Egypt, because they too will face the same issues that Morsi and the Brotherhood faced. That is the declining economy, the role of the military, and its relationship with the judiciary system. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. I want to thank you guys for watching. Take care and sağ ol.